Hello, and welcome to the second week of Biblical Exegesis Practicum at Life Pacific University online. I have to say I've been really impressed with your work thus far. This first week went pretty well. There's one thing that I need to clarify, which I think maybe I didn't clarify in the previous videos. Actually, two things. One, for the worksheets, what I'd like you to do is just to download the worksheet and then do your work on the worksheet itself. Makes it easier for you to keep track of what you've completed and what you haven't completed. Makes it easier for me to see what you have and haven't completed. And speaking of completing things, I really do need to see your observations, however you decide to do them. If that means you're marking up the text and then displaying that somehow in Word, or if you're typing out bullet points, I need to be able to see your observations. Typically, bullet points tend to work best, but I know that there are some people that are visual and they want to be able to mark up the text. And if there's a way that you can convey that to me, I'm open to checking that out and seeing how it works out for you. Okay. And the second thing is on the structural outline. You're not going to have to do a lot of structural outlines in this class, but you do need to be aware of how to do one moving forward into higher Bible classes, upper division Bible classes. And one technical error that seems to be coming up quite a bit is you can't have a 1 without a 2 or an A without a B, that sort of thing. And that basically means, when we're working on structuring the passage, we're dividing it into two pieces whenever we create a structural division. And that necessitates two pieces. You can't divide into one, right? That doesn't work. And so if you find yourself wanting to say one thing, just one point, that's probably more of a summary for the main heading than it is a separate point on its own. Okay. And so whenever you go back through your outline, make sure you don't have any 1s that don't have 2s, don't have any A's that don't have B's, and then make sure that you cover all of the verses in the passage as well, though I didn't see anybody making that mistake, so we should be okay on that. So that more or less takes care of week 1. Week 2, we're moving into poetry. Now, this is my favorite part of my favorite course. I've told you that Biblical Exegesis Practicum is my favorite class to teach. This is my favorite part of this class, which isn't to say that the rest of it isn't going to be fun, but this is particularly fun. I love the book of Jonah. I have been reading Jonah in Hebrew mostly since about 2004, 2005. I love this book. Love this book. And so I'm really excited for us to dive into the poetry in Jonah. And I know it may seem odd for us to choose Jonah as our poetry book, but it helps us to appreciate narrative as well, because the poem is in the midst of a narrative. So it kind of sets us up to move into the narrative discussion, which will come after the poetry project. So just to look at our worksheet really quick, and this isn't going to be due until the end of next week, but if you want to get started on it early, you can for sure. You're going to complete the first, second, and third observations of the 6-step procedure for the book of Jonah using the provided translation. Okay. Now this provided translation is actually my translation of Jonah. So you'll see here lots of footnotes. You'll see some color-coded words. I try to give you a lot of information in here to help you think through what's happening here without having to know the Hebrew text. Because there's a lot of things in the book of Jonah that are hard to pick up on in English, but are very, very clear in the Hebrew text. And so, for instance, in verse 2, you see, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry upon her, because her evil has come up before me." A few things to note here. One, you see arise, go, and cry are all underlined. These are what I'm going to call the prophetic imperatives in the book of Jonah. These are the 3 things that Yahweh tells Jonah to do, and they're going to keep coming up throughout the rest of the book. So those are underlined there because you need to take note of that. And if you look, in footnote number 4, I say specifically the 3 imperatives here play significant roles throughout the rest of the narrative. The other participants in the narrative seem to be closer to obeying Jonah's call than he does. And so that's an important thing to pick up on. Second, you'll see that great is blue That's because great shows up a lot in this book, and that's just an important thing for us to notice. And then you'll see evil is red. And so the same thing, this word evil, and sometimes it isn't translated as evil, comes up a lot, and it's important for us to note that. And so if you see a word in blue, even if it's not translated as great, that would be gadol in Hebrew, the word great. And if you see a word in red, even if it's not translated as evil, that would be the word ra in Hebrew. Okay, and so those are just things for you to note. You may also notice it says to cry upon her. That sounds kind of awkward. I'm leaning more towards a literal translation here, which, you know, I wouldn't choose to read this kind of a translation on my own, but sometimes we try to get the English as close to the Hebrew as we can. It makes for awkward English, but it will help us sometimes interpretively to see things, right? To see what's going on there. And so that's what I'm shooting for here. And so as you read through this translation, you'll notice, some different things. I just want you to pay attention to that, but don't go overboard. Okay, this is book level observations, and so you don't need to, spend 15 hours on book level observations. You just want to get a basic feel for the overall book, and then I want you to do the 6-step procedure on Jonah 2, which is Jonah's prayer. Now, this is actually going to be a different translation. This is going to be Jim W. Adams' translation, who's a professor at Life Pacific University in California. I'm out here in Virginia. Dr. Adams was one of my professors, as I mentioned before, and he designed this class, I believe. And so this translation of the poem, you're going to be working off his translation. Now, you're welcome to compare my translation with his translation if you want. There's going to be some differences there. Some things, may help you, may not. I don't know. That's up to you. But do the 6-step procedure on Jonah's prayer. And then last week we had intertextuality as extra credit. This week we're going to do intertextuality as a part of the project. And so what I want you to do is I want you to read Exodus 34, 5-9. And then you'll notice here I have a link that will take you to the passages for our intertextuality for the week, so that we don't have to look all of them up. And so I've got those all cut and pasted. And what we're going to be working off of here, what we're shooting for is specifically Jonah 4, 1-4 uses something from Exodus 34. And it's somewhat ironic that he uses this. And so I want you to see how that phrase, that is Yahweh's self-definition, how that phrase is used elsewhere in the Old Testament, just in a few of these passages. And then I want you to look at it in Jonah, and I want you to try to think through, what does this tell us about who Jonah is? And then for the poetical analysis, you'll see Adams's translation there, again, for Jonah's prayer. And then you'll see 2 examples linked for Moodle. And I want you to do a poetical analysis. We're going to be talking about this in more detail in another video. And then you have a paper here, Jonah the Anti-Prophet. And this is a paper that I wrote in graduate school. And I'm working on getting it published currently. So please don't send it out to a bunch of people. This will hopefully give you an idea of what graduate level biblical studies looks like. If you're interested in moving that direction, kind of give you an idea of that, and then it'll also give you some ideas about poetical analysis in Jonah. Okay, so that's basically the worksheet for the week. The main thing that we're going to be working on this week is what does it mean to be studying poetry? Why are we studying poetry, and what do we need to know about it? Okay, we'll get into more of the technical side of things and the poetical analysis in the next video. But for this video, we really want to key in on, remember last week we talked about observations of artwork, right? Well, poetry is artwork. And so we should see poetry as an expression of the heart of the author. So that doesn't necessarily mean that when we read poetry in Scripture that it's giving us an accurate representation of the world. It's giving us an accurate representation of the heart of the poet. Now, sometimes that's an accurate representation of the world, sometimes it's not. You read some of the lament psalms and they can get pretty dark. right? That doesn't mean that that's actually the state of affairs in the universe, but it does mean that that's how the author of the poem felt. And this is important for us because that's actually a validation of our emotions, right? The existence of a lament psalm, especially the preponderance of lament psalms in the Psalms, indicates to us that there's a validation for those feelings, and even a pattern for expressing those feelings, even if they aren't necessarily accurate. The vast majority of lament psalms, all of them, in fact, except for one, the only exception being Psalm 88, give us this pattern of expressing our frustration and then moving towards trust, which is sort of like, Lord, where are you? But I'm going to trust you. Psalm 88 does not do this, and I would recommend reading it at some point just to give yourself an awareness of its existence in the scriptures and the fact that that is, in fact, scripture. Psalm 88 is dark, and it expresses the despair and doesn't really end on the up note that the rest of the Psalms, the lament Psalms, do. And so this is important for us because, sometimes, especially within Pentecostalism, we can have a tendency to try to suppress our emotions in the interest of speaking in faith and that sort of thing. And I'm not trying to denigrate any kind of faith confession or anything like that, but we do need to be careful if we are censoring ourselves and not allowing our emotions to be expressed. There's room for that expression of emotion in the movement towards trust, in the movement towards the faith declaration. If we skip directly to that faith declaration, what will often happen is that emotion will find its way out on its own and will likely not express itself in a way that we would want it to. And so this is really encouraging for us in biblical interpretation, that we can see this sort of expression regularly throughout the canon, that emotions are good things, that God created us as emotional beings, that He doesn't want us to erase our emotions or suppress our emotions, but rather that He wants us to express our emotions in a way that moves towards Him and towards trust in Him. And that our emotions can be legitimate expressions of who we are and legitimate expressions of our experience of our relationship with Him. So that's a brief shot of poetry. You'll get plenty more information about poetry in the textbooks and the lectures from the authors of the textbooks. In our next video, we're going to be talking about how to analyze poetry, specifically kind of how to tear it apart, similar to what we did with the structural outline in the Exodus project last week, but specifically with regard to poetry. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the specific intertextual elements, and then you'll finish your poetry worksheet by the end of next week. So this week, you're going to have a discussion post, and you're going to want to read and watch your lecture videos from the textbooks. And next week, you're going to want to get into that poetry worksheet. So see you next time.